Dawn asked me to address her seminar here. I met Dawn serendipitously through her sister and her son-in-law on a trip to Washington State and Montana. And Dawn has had a long-standing interest in physics. I knew when I was 8 years old I wanted to be a physicist, and I pursued that pretty much single-mindedly throughout my early childhood and everything else. And so I hold degrees in physics. I have an engineering physics degree from the University of Tulsa, and I hold a master's in physics from the University of Rochester, where I studied, and my thesis was on the quantum light interactions with matter. I was fascinated with how light interacted with mass, and that is a subject that is still being researched today, primarily through the use of lasers and particle beams. I've had a very crazy career. I tell people I was a cat in a previous life, and I've had 8 lives, and my 8th life was in education. I worked through a number of high technology, technical and executive positions leading up to a retirement at the age of 52. And going into teaching at the time, President Obama had said they were looking for 100,000 engineers to become teachers at one of his inaugural addresses. And so I took him up on it and became a teacher in the Dallas Independent School System. And this was in the previous decade. So if you think about my time frame and what I'm talking about, it's going to be 2010-ish to 2019-ish, pre-COVID. And the context and it will be in a public education space at the high school level. And it will be the special needs students and all of the programs which I will address as we go forward were established in the context of the President Bush's No Child Left Behind Act. So a lot of the special education, special needs programs, policies, procedures, so on and so forth, language especially, we will be, I'm going to kind of take you back on a historical dive. And so let me apologize in advance. Some of my language or some of my words are probably not the right words today. I think we've seen a greater understanding emerge even here in the last 5 to 10 years of subjects surrounding autism and neurodiversity. When I was in the teaching world, neurodiversity was not a word, and it was certainly not a word that we used on a regular basis. And so just fundamental things like that, I think, are still happening in this field, and it's pretty interesting to me. And I have a personal interest in the evolving nature of this topic because my niece, my sister's daughter, is also neurodivergent, and she's currently in college. Okay, so that's enough of that. Roger, if you would show the little slide that I gave you. I have one slide in this presentation and one video. And Roger's showing a slide I think we all know and have some familiarity and experience with. Please go gentle on the messenger here. We were learning by doing as we went through all of this. And you get thrown into a classroom with 30 kids, and 3 of them are special needs, and you're figuring out on the fly how you're teaching physics and what in the world am I going to do with these 3 kids who have special needs. So I made mistakes. I wish some of them I could take back. And as you'll see in the video, there might be some cringeworthy moments during that video, but we meant well. Our hearts were in the right place, and I hope you will accept my apologies in advance for that. Okay, and you are all welcome to use this slide. It's a Matt Groening slide. I love it. I think it's fantastic. Okay, so let me first talk. Dawn and I have had a few conversations about learning physics and science. And I'm a physics teacher, but a lot of this is generally applicable to STEM, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. And so just a few little hit points I want to get to on the early childhood development. Research on mathematics aptitude. Physics is a science for which the language is mathematics. And if you are not able to speak mathematics fluently, you will struggle in learning physics, certainly, and many other sciences. And so the foundations for mathematics go actually way back into 3 and 4 and 5-year-olds. And the research on this that I have seen and is used often in early educational programs associated with mathematics is the following. Students who are not able to make young people, very young people, 3 to 5, 3 to 6, they have to be able to make what we think of as a 2-dimensional to 3-dimensional mapping in their heads. You have to be able to translate 2-dimensional concepts, shapes, into objects. You have to be able to translate things that are happening both in space and in time simultaneously in your head. So you have to be able to project forward and backward in your head in time, and you have to be able to imagine things happening, situations, events occurring in forward time or in backward time. And if you are comfortable with this, if your neural development makes it easy for you to do this as a small child, then in the processing of introduction of mathematical concepts, you are much more likely to be successful. So I guess one of the things that I encourage everyone that I meet who have small children or who are working with small children is active involvement in 3-dimensional play, 3-dimensional discovery, exploration, talking, everything you can do to introduce multiple dimensions to very young children at as early a stage as possible is to their benefit in terms of mastery of mathematics. The second is the emphasis in the use of language. Physics is probably the worst of all the sciences in that there are multiple meanings to common words. And this can be very confusing if you're stuck with the idea that in a language, one word has one meaning. And in physics, for example, let's just take the simple word force. The force be with you is implication of some metaphysical, spiritual thingy. But in the physics world, force has a very precisely defined mathematical meaning. And we, unfortunately, as a science, borrow from the language heavily to describe what we are intending to be very precise scientific concepts. And so if you're not able to simply, oh, that word means this in this context, but means this in a different context, you will struggle with the mastery of physics, and you will be up against it, I guess, in a number of other languages. So teaching of language where it's kind of learned by rote or by repetition, without the understanding that these are just symbols, these words that we write and we speak are just symbols for other things, and they can also have multiple meanings. Multiple symbols can be attached. Multiple properties can be associated with one thing. Lots of things like this. A facility in language is actually a great benefit to students learning science. And so being multilingual early is helpful. Being able to understand that there's lots of ways to say the same thing, and sometimes saying the same thing over and over can mean multiple things. And that's really all I have to add in that area. When you move on a little further into the elementary school environment in the current milieu, there are things in public education. Now, I can't speak to what happens in private education. I have no experience there. I have limited experience. I have done some work there. But in general, in public education, gifted and talented identification is done early. Students are identified through a variety of tests, interviews, teacher observations, and students are labeled as being or associated within a cohort labeled gifted and talented. Now, and GT for short. So you're a GT student or you're not. Now, many times this student is not, they're not otherwise identified or carved out. They're not put in special classes or anything like that early on. It's just an observation that they make about this student. However, the unfortunate ramification of GT labeling is that students who have a GT label applied early tend to be treated like a gifted and talented student going forward, whether that label was ever true or not. And students are missed early that have potential to be gifted in what we would think of in the common meaning of the word as gifted and talented and deserving of further support in certain directions. They are missed completely and they don't get on that merry-go-round as they go forward. So it's a difficult thing. The unfortunate aspect of it is in today's kind of usage, I had it explained to me during my professional development work by the facilitator that the kids that are come to class, sit in the front row, take good notes, turn in their homework, make A's on the tests, those are not your gifted and talented students. Those are the A students. The kid that's sitting in the back of the room, wearing black, has a torn pair of blue jeans on, has lots of jewelry or tattoos and stuff like that, and spiky hair that looks like the Unabomber. That's your gifted and talented student. Well, you can see the obvious problem there. They can both. All of those students can be both simultaneously, and at certain times and not other times, and so on. But the unfortunate labeling here is the troublemaking, hard to teach, difficult student who is otherwise seemingly okay is considered gifted and talented. Now, how does this relate to our topic? In addition to this, we have, again, testing, interviews, test observations, and so forth. There are a group of then students who are labeled as special needs students. And in the language of No Child Left Behind, these are SPED students. So students with special needs are then treated in two ways. And you all may know some of this, but I'm just touching this point for completeness. The students that are considered to have minor special needs or needs that can be accommodated, the word accommodation is big, they are mainstreamed into normal classrooms to the extent that it's possible. They may or may not be mainstreamed on their own, or they may have an assistant, an adult assistant help them through this. And then there is a group of students whose needs are considered to be so significant that they cannot be mainstreamed into the larger general population of students. And they are put into a separate cohort, and they are taught in separate classrooms by other highly trained teachers. Now, unfortunately, again, this labeling, classification, diversion, non-inclusion decision is fraught with mistakes. And it's a tragic thing to watch, but there we are. So that's the context I wanted to just be everybody to be aware of. Okay, so I taught high school students, high school physics at the junior and senior level at a at-risk school district here in Dallas, in largely Hispanic and ethnic student bodies. The challenges of such students to start with are immense. Most of the students were at or near the poverty level, line of poverty. Most of them were 1 or 3 years behind in their education by the time they got to me, in terms of standardized tests and things. And so there was a lot of catching up and a lot of just day-to-day issues that these students were struggling with. One of the things that became quickly apparent in teaching at this students at this level was that I had to find a number of different ways to present the material. I'm a classically trained physicist. I was fortunate to be math obsessed at an early age. And so to me, how I learned physics was certainly not the way to be teaching physics. And I had a number of students. I think I kind of tried to do a quick count on this. I probably had 20 special needs students slipstreamed into my classes. And I'd say about half of them had adult assistants alongside. So I can relay what worked and what was effective with those students. And I just made some quick notes here. The first was the use of whiteboarding. 12 by 18, 20 by 30 whiteboards with whiteboard markers. If I gave the special needs students their own markers and boards and allowed them to take their notes in their own way rather than having, standardized note paper or pencils and stuff like that, which the rest of the students were using, I felt they were more engaged. And so the other thing that the whiteboard allowed me to do is I could see from a greater distance what they were actually doing, right? And so I could tell where they were pausing or when they were, doodling or not paying attention and stuff. And I go, oh, I need to go over there and, get them reintegrated into what's going on. That was very handy. And so then the issue of speaking physics and vocabularies. I had students practice using vocabulary like the word force. We'd start the lesson on, say, forces with how many ways can you use the word force in a sentence? And everybody would get a chance at this. And so forcing my students to articulate, use their audio channels, output channels, as opposed to just their receiving channels was also good. The other was the use of colors and graphs. I was turned on to this idea by a AP physics teacher who uses color in his teaching because he learned that visual learners, color has a greater imprint than just speaking and writing up there at the board equations in a black magic marker. And so I started using color purposely, like he suggested. So for example, in my classes and my lectures, the force symbol F, every time I used a symbol, would have a special color assigned to it. So when you would look at the symbol, you'd look at the Newton's equation for the second law, F equals ma, force equals mass times acceleration. You would see it in color as red F, black equals, M was green because it was from the earth, and A, the acceleration, was blue because it was kinetic and you were shooting up into the sky. And so by connecting the words to the colors, to the symbol, to the idea behind it, you could sort of begin to construct a contextualized story around the Newton's second law. And then you could ask students to reason about this equation as the lessons would go on by asking them to relate colors to each other and what set of colors have to be balanced by another set of colors. So if you see a red F, you've got to have other red Fs on the other side, or you have to have combinations of green and blue, for example. And so this was a way to sort of access a different visual into connecting up a different way of understanding how the concepts related to each other, which is really what the equation is trying to do, mass times acceleration, right? So then the other thing that is I had embraced very early, and I recommend it for everybody who's certainly teaching students with multiple learning modalities, and that is learn by doing. In the advanced educational research world, teaching physics today, learning by doing, learning through the use of models, learning through use of experiments before theory, all of these project-based learning is extremely crucial. And so if you're not involved in programs of that nature, if we're not teaching students, autistic students, students with special needs without massive amounts of project-based learning, we're really missing the boat. Okay, so that's all I wanted to say about my prior experience in teaching. It's kind of, it's a little bit abstract. I will say this, the most difficult topic in my first freshman year physics class is two-dimensional projectile kinematics, which are physics words for What happens when you shoot an arrow into the air? Where does the arrow go? How fast will it get there? Where will it land? How long will it take? I shoot an arrow into the air, and where it goes, I know not where. Well, no, as a physicist, you should be able to figure that out. Where does it go? And so we would do this problem on the board. It was the culmination of our kinematics and force combined unit. It's a big problem. It's very mathematically intense. It's visual. You've got, and we actually would do experiments, right? We would shoot these little toy gun, plunger gun things at Nerf guns and stuff, and people would understand, okay, this is what we're trying to do, and where's it going to land, and can you predict where it's going to land, and all this other good stuff. And so one of the things that I always wanted to make sure we could do is with my autistic students who had their whiteboard, I would sit down after I, dispatched with the other 20 or so other kids in the room, and they were off shooting Nerf guns at each other. Then I would sit down with each of them and their adult assistant, and I would go over this slowly, step by step, to make sure to see if they understood what was actually happening. And they got a lot of one-on-one time with me on this, because I felt like if they could master this topic, if they could just work through what I consider to be the very toughest concept, the most difficult thing for us to take on all semester, that they would come away with a sense of accomplishment, an understanding, and something that they would see every day for the rest of their lives and know something about. And to my pleasant surprise, my first year, and then I began to expect it, all of my mainstream autistic students were able to master this topic with enough patience and just let them move through it at their own pace, and it worked. I was so, coming at teaching at the age of 54 and not having any experience working with autistic children before then, it was a super exciting thing for me personally, and it was a big smile on their face. And I think I surprised a few of their adult assistants as well, because I don't think they had seen any of that in a while. So that was cool. But I want to talk a little bit about this next sort of topic, my RoboFlash team. RoboFlash was a robotics team. So in addition to teaching physics, I was a robotics coach. FIRST Robotics, the acronym FIRST, for Inspiration and Recognition in STEM and Technology. You can Google FIRST Robotics and you get a wealth of information as to what the program is. I started FIRST Robotics teams everywhere I went. I wound up starting 8 robotics teams in my career of teaching, and I was actively involved at the international level in this program. It is the best, and I would argue the most successful, and perhaps the only meaningful STEM activity for STEM interested high school students in the world today. It is the counterpart to athletics and band. It is the counterpart to theater. It is the thing. And so it's a big deal for neurotypical students all over the world. And we felt one of my students who was on my team had this incredibly insightful, brilliant beam of light, just type of idea that we should expand the access to this incredible opportunity to neurodivergent students in our very midst. And so I just wanted to say that it introduces the RoboFlash team. They named their team, and the reason they named them, we were Robo Bisons. Our school thing was the Bisons, Sunset Bisons. And so we were the Robo Bisons. Everybody's team is Robo, whatever their mascot usually. But the RoboFlash team named themselves RoboFlash. And when we asked them why they came up with that name, they said, because we can feel our neurons flashing. And so that's why they named themselves the RoboFlash. And I just, even today, 10 years later, I'm still just goosebumped about this whole thing. So Roger, without any more chat, let's, if you haven't watched the video, I think you're in for a treat. If you have, might take some notes as to things that you observe through there that you would like to ask about, or things that you kind of catch you by like, whoa, what happened there? And I'll be happy to expand on it after the video.
February 6, 2016 the first time the world has ever seen a full robotics team consisting of just special needs students that created all their robots themselves with their own two hands.
So last year, the team, one of the students on the team, Yvonne Torres, had this idea. She had worked with the special needs kids in the past, and she thought it would be fun to bring them upstairs and have them join us with a build session. So we had 8811 FTC kids sitting next to the Flash kids, and within 30 minutes we'd blown through everything that we had thought that they could do, and they were just going. So that's when we all sort of stepped back and realized that there was a lot more here than we really expected.
We saw that the incredible things these kids can do that a lot of people thought they couldn't. And we wanted to do more, so we actually researched and saw that they had no STEM after high school. Basically their future was stay at home with their parents or just try to find something in art, something in that nature to do. But there was no math, science, or a career path actually for them after high school. So that's where the idea started to come up with the robotics league for them.
And then this summer, when we were talking about some outreach ideas, the team came up with this idea to start an actual robotics team for kids with special needs. And it's one of those ideas that as an adult you think to yourself, well, that's been done, or there's a reason why it's not being done. And so, but then if you start researching, you find that it's never been done. And that's when I started getting this chill. I was an entrepreneur for many years. I worked at Texas Instruments in corporate research, and I know when a good idea comes, and they come very rarely. And this is truly a world-changing idea. And it just, right now, I can just feel it right here, and it's still here. It's been here for over a year, and it'll probably be this way for a long time.
I Googled like crazy. So basically, I just searched up a random question like, where do special needs students go after high school? What is their future? What careers in STEM do special needs kids have? Is there anybody successful who is in any math, science, top job related subject or anything like that? And nothing came up. Nothing on Google popped up, Yahoo, Answer.com, nothing. Books, nothing. Magazines, nothing. There was nothing.
We wanted to teach these kids more, and we wanted to see what they're capable of, and I think they've blown all of our minds, you know, when they show us what they can do.
I went in blind like everybody else. I thought that they couldn't do it at first, and I wanted to say that, you know, I kind of took it easy on them, just thinking because, oh, well, they're special needs, you know, let's take it a little easier on them. But it's actually not like that. They can do hard stuff, and as they progress, I progress to see that they can do it. So, you know, a little tougher and a little tougher, and they were able to accomplish a lot more than I ever thought.
These special needs kids feel discouraged at times, and I think with this program, they feel inspired and they feel motivated and they feel like they can do something. And with the project this big, I think it's important to have somebody who cares for them, and, you know, to have somebody who knows them and who actually shows genuine care for them. And I think that was me, and I really enjoyed teaching them how to drive. And to see them learn how, and their smiles on their faces, and just how glad they were when they knew that they could do it, was a big thing for me.
When you think back on robotics, what was your favorite thing that we did?
Driving and like pick up the blocks and like put your car back in the space and stuff. It's kind of fun. You can help your teammates out in case they need some struggles, and that's pretty much it. I feel like a happy meaning to me. Yeah. I can do this. I got this, and I did it. That's not.
So the whole point of this is that it is similar to FTC because they do exactly what we did despite their conditions. They built their own robot just like we did. They drove it, and in fact, they picked up very nicely onto the game. Sometimes we feel nervous about going onto the field, or sometimes we doubt our robot, or sometimes we doubt our driving skills. They doubted themselves at some point, and they still did it.
One of the things that I found that we did not anticipate was that we saw the project as primarily us helping the Flash kids achieve something in the way of STEM and building a robot and competing with it and growing from that experience. What we didn't fully appreciate until it began to happen was that we were also growing from that experience. I know myself, I've seen kids with special needs in a different way now. I'm certainly more knowledgeable and more comfortable with working with them, which as a teacher maybe was not true for me in the past. I saw little things between our students, between our FTC 8811 kids, and just little vignettes of little interactions, just little things that you began to see that it wasn't just us helping them. They were actually two kids talking to each other as peers. They saw each other as equals, different perhaps, but they were just two sides of a different coin.
Well, at first we were like a bit uncomfortable with the whole thing since it was like really big and we didn't know how to handle it. But when we began to see how important it was, we came out of our comfort zones and we communicated with them and built this strong relationship with them. And that's how we fortified our path to what we are right now.
I hope RoboFlash gets their own league and they can have other teams participate with them, so it's not just RoboFlash being divided with 4 robots competing against each other. I hope any robotics team around here can, bring the special ed kids in their school and say, yo, I trust you.
These special need kids really have potential to bring something to the world, and we're leading them into something that could potentially change their future.
It's an amazing journey. We've been seeing it right in front of us, and we never knew that this was possible. It has changed the lives of my kids who are on the teams, and as you can see, it's certainly changing the lives of everyone involved, including me. I think the future of this idea is very similar in many respects to Special Olympics. More Flash teams, more teams from other communities coming together in a tournament context, very similar to the types of tournaments we see now with FIRST Robotics.
There is a program that we can do, we can all do in our schools. It just takes those people to take that extra time to give that extra help to these kids that can do it.
If someone can trust in you and someone can have confidence in you and give you enough confidence to have confidence in yourself, you can go a long way.
This is an unserved community of students and young people who do not get STEM opportunities in their education or in the workforce. They don't get to do anything like this in their normal class day, and they won't stop. They'll keep doing it until we all go home.
Javi, what do you do in robotics? You build stuff? How? Show me with your hands. Like that? And then how do you drive the robot? With your hands? What does the robot have to do? Do you like being in robotics? Do you think that it's helped you? But what do you like about robotics? Building stuff? Okay. What else do you like? You like it? Okay. What else? That's it? Okay.
Yeah, watching that video, I haven't watched it in a couple of years. Then when Dawn asked me to do this a month or so ago, I rewatched it again. It's still an extraordinary thing. Unfortunately, I have to say that the idea didn't quite take off as we had hoped. One of the students, I think it was Jennifer, had talked about the time commitment. What we did not understand at the time was that to have this program work, it required approximately 1 hour of neurotypical student for every 2 hours of neurodivergent student in a hands-on setting. So each of my RoboBisons could stick with two of the Flash kids, for the length of a practice, and we had to have at least two adults, two of the SPED teachers also working with us essentially as coaches after school. And so the difficulty in scaling this up was that it was extremely time intensive. My students, it was an unspoken thing. They never talk about it in this video, but to measure their commitment to this project, FTC FIRST robotics teams are limited to 15 students, and they compete in a ladder of events to try to get to a world championship where the top 120 teams in the world qualify. And we had qualified twice at the level below the worlds, and Yvonne and many of the girls on the team were seniors in this team, and their dream had been to make it to the worlds. They had been working for 3 years to get to the worlds, and we thought we were going to get there, but the RoboFlash team took so much energy and so much of our time that our own robot was not as competitive as we had hoped it to be. And as a result, we failed to meet the qualification requirement at the super regionals to step up to the world championship. However, the work of the team was recognized by the judges. The team did receive an extremely rare and prestigious judges award. It's a special thing that they give at their own initiative. It's rarely given, but when judges see a team they feel needs to be recognized and they will not be recognized through some other more established way, they decide to give the team a judges award. And so my team did get to go down to the floor for the announcement. They were given a almost 5-minute standing ovation by 10,000 people, but they did not make it to the worlds. And so it was a bittersweet thing for our team. I don't think they would do anything different. I think they would do it all again. So that's all I have to say about RoboFlash, unless somebody has questions about RoboFlash.
Have there been other attempts by other people to try to replicate this? I know the video starts out with, in 2016 it was sort of one of the first or the first attempt,
right.
And I'm curious if other folks have tried to do this, and if what their experiences were.
So there was an initiative in the Northwest. They have a different method of handling their special needs students through the school system. And they have a more formalized subversion of the Special Olympics that is integrated into their school context. And I know that some people got in touch with us, asked us how we might do that within like at a district level, or at the there's a consortium of school districts in the Northwest that participate in this program for their special needs kids. And so they started looking for ways to add STEM, competitive type STEM things to their program, in addition to the athletic ones and some of the others that they had established. So I don't know how far that got, but it seemed to have it had a lot more administrative adult support for the concept. They were far more enlightened than I would say the educators here in the Midwest. So I haven't looked into it. I'm hoping that they were able to take some steps in that direction. It's an extraordinary experience, right? I mean, you probably saw it vicariously through your dad. Taking things out of the school classroom context, I think, is extraordinarily valuable. It, in my view, if you take the walls away, you take away the barriers to expanding your idea of what it is you're being exposed to. And these robotics competitions, the students are not competing with each other to make the highest grade in a class, or more precisely, they're not competing with each other to do as little work as possible. They to make a passing grade. They are all motivated to be the best robotics team on the planet. And when you set the bar at that level, there's no limits to what people can do and can come up with. And I think it's being proven now at a whole different scale. I'm back in my hometown here in Texas, in Dallas, to visit and do some other things, and I took the opportunity this week to go call in on some of my favorite robotics people, and all of their programs are exploding at the seams. They now have hundreds of kids in these teams at each school. They're still not big enough. There are lists of hundreds of kids wanting to get on these teams, lots of community outreach activity. I think it's just a matter of time before somebody organizes around this group of underserved students. The video showed textbooks and some, middle school and elementary school materials in their classroom, their dedicated SPED room. That's the extent of science education right now today in public education. It is a tragic thing. And I'm not going to try to pretend like they can all get, PhDs in chemistry and stuff, or like Dawn did a PhD in a subject I can't even pronounce. But the reality is that they are extremely capable of doing things with their hands, thinking about building things, processing, integrating, concepts from. And as long as it stays tangible, look at me, I'm waving my phone, or I'm getting excited, I'm talking with my hands. As long as it stays physically tangible, it's a very accessible thing. And I don't know why we're not doing more of it. And I'm hoping, I know a group here in North Dallas, they have started a community-based STEM program. It's not affiliated with any school systems, and so they're free to do whatever they think is smart. And one of the components of the program is for homeschooled students. And I'm hoping that they will continue to expand on this idea of serving additional underserved students. At my last stop at Woodrow High School, which was after sunset, we had a robotics team, and we had that high school was the designated school for deaf students. So all the students who had a auditory disability were routed to Woodrow High School, and we outreach to that group, and we had like 6 or 8 students on our team that were deaf, and it was a relatively minor set of barriers to overcome, in comparison to the Flash students, but they made it. They got there. It was not a challenging thing. All it took was some paying attention, making some accommodations, having a little patience, and letting them get at it. And there it was. It was, for me, it seems to be not a hard thing to do, but obviously in our society, it's becoming, or has been, always been, an extremely high bar. So, hey, Dawn, I see you.
Yeah, I was going to jump in and say hello. I think there was something wrong with the link I got earlier, but the one that Roger just sent me obviously does work. So I'm sorry I missed a big chunk. I won't ask you to recap at this point, but it sounds like it's going well.
So, Dawn, what, I hinted at the very beginning that for whatever reason, you've added me to your tribe, and I'm not even to this day entirely sure why I deserve such an honor, but you might share with the group why you thought to add me to this amazing group that you've got going.
Well, you're a nut.
Yeah, so I've been told.
I mean, I love your mind. As I've said to you before, it's hard for me. I find it rare that I am challenged by someone who thinks in such different ways that I struggle to keep up. I mean, there are a lot of things I don't understand. I'll make that clear. But it's like I know just enough about what you talk about to be extraordinarily interested but I have to run to keep up with you. And I find that exhilarating. And you've got just an amazing heart. And that combination is rarer still.
Thank
So
you.
that's the answer.
I feel the same way when I'm with you, Dawn. I talk about you constantly with people, and they all stare at me like, "What's wrong with this guy?" But it's like we have it's like the Michelangelo. We have the most tenuous connection across, and we know it's working, and we're trying to figure out how to make the bandwidth bigger. But we're both anchored in incredible places that need more connectivity.
Yeah,
and so I think the more of this type of work that you're doing with Roger, I think the more of this, the better. So, hooray.
Did you happen to mention that we were working on this sort of holographic model of the universe?
No, I didn't. I didn't know if I was allowed to branch off.
Oh, sure. I mean, we do it as a habit. We branch off constantly. That said, I don't want to slow your roll if you're
No, you go. Go for it.
But yeah, another reason that I find our friendship exciting is that we do sort of, as I said, meet in the middle of a lot of conceptual ideas and the theoretical physics. And you and I had been working on the sort of the mathematical model of the holographic universe and how that would sort of be anchored in traditional materialist mathematics and then cover this spectrum into more and more theory and poetry, for lack of a better word, as a possible set of protocols for people, neuroexpansive people like me, who have a real challenge with math, the kind of math that you're so brilliant at, and find ways for them to plug in somewhere along that spectrum and understand math in new and different ways. I still hope before we croak over, we find a way to do that, even though life is very busy. But yeah, I saw that as having great potential to help neuroexpansive people for sure.
Well, I think it's still there, and I think if we can arrange our physical lives to be more in coincidence, we can continue to work on that. Unfortunately, reality keeps intervening.
Yes,
we have this stubborn thing that keeps getting in the way of what we really aspire to do.
Yes. Well, we'll make a point of it.
I would be curious for the participants who were here, if you could give me one takeaway and one thing you wished we had been able to cover.
From what I gather from this is it takes a real lot of passion and hard work. You have to really go above and beyond, it seems. So it really is a matter of getting like the right kind of people sort of interested and sort of on board. And I guess it's kind of rare because this particular project with the video, it seemed like it was a beautiful thing, but eventually the students graduate, and people have to move on to the next part of their life, and then to have that sustainable, it almost feels so challenging, because it's almost like you have to have the right folks together doing sort of aligned in the same efforts. This is not something that you would do just kind of as a 9-to-5 type of job. You really have to really be vested in it, not just for immediate reward, but I think the long term. And I guess the fact that it hasn't caught on more, kind of shows that it's a lot more rare. It's a lot rarer than we might think, even though we all really think it's a great idea and feel good about these kinds of things. People actually doing it and sustaining it is hurdle?
Well, it was definitely a heavy lift. Every one of us involved at the adult, even the kids, I think, but certainly I know, speaking because I had more personal conversations with the adults involved, it was a very heavy lift. And that video, my wife first thought, she looked at it, she said, "Man, your eyes were dark then." And you can see it. I mean, I was exhausted. And yes, it's definitely above and beyond. And you would like to hope that it could be more, I don't want to use this word in the wrong way, but more institutionalized, more support for it, and more recognition for it. It would probably take some of the burden off, but it's always going to be a tough one.
I think one of the biggest misapprehensions of my life has been that if people see something succeed, they will embrace it. Or if it makes sense, especially if it makes sense and succeeds, they will embrace it. And I have been wrong about that. And I guess you can speak to this better than I in your position, but it seems like that rests on people liking to stay situated in the status quo, even if things aren't working, because it's familiar. So I was thinking maybe you could comment on that a little bit.
Yes, it was a disappointment for all of us that the idea did not gain. It gained a lot of recognition. We were recognized far and wide, but it didn't sustain. It didn't take enough root that there was enough resource and things were not diverted in its direction enough to make it work. And yes, there is a bit of a status quo thing. I think most people on the planet are comfortable in what I refer to as their fur-lined rut. They're happy where they are. Things are good. Everything's okay. And I'm just going to stay in this fur-lined rut to wherever it goes. And I don't really know where, but it's nice. Oh, look, squirrel. And that's kind of how it goes. And we did shake some trees along the way. Some nuts did fall out of the sky, but it wasn't enough. And to your point, Roger, we realized later it was going to take even more than we had delivered. And that was a very sad and depressing kind of thing, actually. Yeah. Morgan, you've had your mic off and on a couple of times. I think you were chomping at saying something.
I was gonna say, I don't know what else we could have talked about because I wasn't here for the entire time, but what I did take away was that on a more positive note, there's a lot of creative ways that we can involve everyone in activities that are fulfilling. And I feel like the school systems typically they look at it from a neurotypical perspective, and it's always the second thought to think about, like the special education department or people with special needs. And it should really, they should hold equal, they should be equal, and they should always have the same kind of resources and opportunities.
So in education, I think, George Bush with the No Child Left Behind, that was a massive educational reform. And it did have, I think it was a net positive for students with special needs. I mean, in aggregate from what it used to be, it was probably a nightmare. But I think one of the mistakes that is often made in this area is equality does not equal equality. Equality does not equal equity. And so by simply putting them in the classroom with the other neurotypicals, the neurodivergents are going to be okay. Well, no. In some cases, they should be in their own group so they can facilitate each other's rapid acceleration. They should be assimilated so they can learn to deal with neurotypical in context frequently and more often, so they are not as societally isolated and so on. And so there's a lot more richness and complexity to this issue than simply, well, they were separated before and they lived in a basement, and now we're going to throw them all into the classroom. And if they're really needing somebody to keep them quiet, we're going to put an adult sitting in the chair next to them. That's about as far as that thinking went, actually. And it's not enough, but it certainly was an improvement over apparently what was going on 30 years ago.
I was just talking about at the AANE conference and the site visit we just had for our grant renewal, how it seems, well, one thing we've learned through the ethnography is how important it is to have enough people of like way of being to form sort of a mini culture. Because if you divide and conquer, then the person remains isolated, like you said, loath to speak up, tends to turtle in on every level and sort of ride it out. And I see these as cultural opportunities to have groups of like-minded or like way of being people sharing cultural space in the ways that you're describing. I think that would be brilliant.
You know, one of the things that the RoboFlash program really brought home to me was it's the barriers are not between the kids. The real isolationism occurs between the adults. And it got really bad when we were being recognized all over, and our school district didn't know what we were doing. And so there was some backlash from the SPED district director and the blah, blah, blah. And then, you know, why didn't you tell us you were doing this? And were you aware that you could have violated this law and that law? And, you know, because the SPED stuff comes from the federal level and education is largely ran at the state level, the states are all super paranoid. The districts are all super paranoid about violating federal laws related to SPED students and SPED education. So they're extremely isolationist by nature because they want to control everything and make sure nobody's going to get sued, or more likely, one of the parents of one of the SPED students is going to sue the district. And so all of this stuff, you know, I mean, here we thought we were just doing a good thing for kids we knew down the hall. And it turned into this massive, huge cat fight. It's why we couldn't take the RoboFlash team to the super regionals. We could not clear the administrative approvals necessary to put them on a bus and take them out of town and put them in a hotel for 5 days without their parents. That's what it got down to. And it's like, we couldn't take them. So, you know, it's just, you get to that level and you go, wow, I'm up against a brick wall here. And again, it was all about the adults. It wasn't about the kids. It was never, the problem was never assimilating at the student level, at the 15 and 16-year-old level. That was not where the problem was.
Could you be more specific, if you're able, about exactly what laws were involved here that were problematic?
Well, I don't know them because special education law is pretty specialized, and the experts, right? The experts were the people who were telling me about it. So I'm like, you know, just a classroom teacher here. And what I know about SPED is what I'm told by these supposed experts. And so when you get the district's chief legal counsel telling you stuff, you kind of go, okay, pause up. Unless I'm ready to go hire a lawyer of my own, I'm not going to take this guy on. And so I don't know what it is. I think it all gets down to they're afraid of being sued for some sort of real or imagined potential for abuse or mistreatment of these students. And so they have all these protective policies and procedures in place to ensure that that doesn't happen. Just give you a trivial example. You remember I was telling you about my student, Dawn, that her mom she came in to watch us go through the kinematics whiteboard exercise. And she had been having so much trouble with the school district over other issues that she was watching her daughter like a hawk. I mean, she was helicoptering, you know, at 10 feet. And so she was all over this, and she came marching into my classroom, and she was ready for this, right? And I just sit down, and she was on one side of her daughter, I was on the other side, and when she got done, she hugged me. She was in tears. She said, "I've never seen her do something like this before." I said, "She's quite capable of doing it. It just has to be accessed differently, has to be activated differently." And she was so happy and so excited. And she's somebody who had already sued the school district once. And I had received the document file on her legal work to make sure I did not violate any of the terms of the settlement with the district. So in addition to meeting the normal needs of students, I was also now, here's her case file, which is 3 inches thick, that I'm supposed to now, and I'm going to be the one to lose my job if I misstep in one direction or another with this particular student. And I'm going, man, this is just crazy. I mean, can't we all just try to help her?
Well, and the presumption that someone isn't capable. I mean, one thing that I've tried to emphasize in my work in cultural and anthropology is the presumption of ability, the presumption of capability, and it seems like that can be rare.
It is embedded in the environment. The expectation is failure, not success, and there's many little things along the way that signal failure in the conventional sense that gives validation to that idea. Off-task behavior by a neurodivergent student does not mean failure. It just means you haven't found the right access point. And your obligation as a teacher, much like in a Socratic dialogue, is to find that access point. And it doesn't have to be limited to a Socratic question. You now have to bring more to bear. You have to bring physical things to bear. You have to bring color, more any other way to engage and activate so you can then access that potential. We have too many limited ways. Roger raised that earlier at the beginning of the presentation. Too much of education is still stuck in black and white print, and read it, sit and get type of education. Sad.
So I think one thing this talk reminded me of is just how we're talking about people getting in a rut. People don't think of what's the best way to do X, Y, or Z. They think of what is the standard way to do it, and it's really hard. It's hard for me sometimes just to see that people they just have this one assumption. This is the way it's done, and they don't even think outside the box. I find that very frustrating.
Well, I think part of the frustration there is driven by, unfortunately, in many cases, people are having to communicate or educate on a subject or something that they barely have mastered themselves.
Right.
And those who are master teachers or writers or anybody any creative, they achieve a level of mastery in which they have they're ambidextrous. They have the ability to jump around. They don't worry about how they get into it. They don't worry about staying in the lanes because they know that they're going to get to where they want to go. I'm talking with my hands again. And so they don't worry about trying something. Whereas people who have just barely gotten to the level of mastery enough that they're willing to try to teach, they're still not there. And so not only does it take a lot of effort, like Roger has pointed out, sustained effort, it takes a level of mastery which you're comfortable with trying something and being confident that you can still come to the outcome you want.
Most people seem to go with the path of least resistance. If the easy way to do things is to do the way everybody expects and everybody considers acceptable, and you don't have to think beyond that.
So here's a mantra in the world of physics, in the world of modern physics education. And the mantra is, the one doing the doing is doing the learning. And so in many cases, teachers are trying too hard. What they should do is figure out a way to get the one who you're wanting to do the learning doing something. And once they're doing something, then you can get in there and, you know, course correct and herd the cats in a different direction. But you got to get them doing, because the one doing the doing is doing the learning. And they're also much more capable. Students are surprisingly capable of sustained doing. They're terrible at sustained learning. Right? So, I mean, they're sitting there fidgeting in their chairs in 10 minutes, but if they're doing something, they'll sit there for hours. If it's enough and they're getting something out of it, they'll do it forever.
It reminds me of those things of, like, you know, those cartoon illustrations where you've got about education, where you've got the funnel in the kid's head, and you think that you have to pour it all in there. It all comes from you. All the education comes from you, which isn't exactly how it works.
Create the context and get out of their way. That's the lesson from RoboFlash. That's certainly my lesson from First Robotics for neurotypical students. I see no reason why it wouldn't be any different for neurodivergent students, because it works for the same reason. You're not even forcing, you're creating enough of an interesting environment for them to engage in naturally. And I mean, you know, we are learning creatures. We will learn if we are given the slightest encouragement. My cat will learn if given the slightest encouragement. I mean, it's not a surprising outcome, really. I don't know why we are basing the Montessori school, I guess, Dawn, does it sort of leverage this concept more?
Yes. In fact, my son attended Montessori kindergarten before I decided to homeschool him.
Yeah.
But that somatic engagement, I mean, well, you know, as a primatologist, I'm going to be all about that. Being in a multi-dimensional environment and, you know, pattern seeking, pattern feeling, pattern engagement on a somatic level just activates all kinds of blueprints in the mind that are dormant in our current approach to teaching.
So I'm not sure who was speaking but I wanted to say to your point about the pouring the knowledge into the funnel, and it was my job as the teacher. That's an excellent. There is a saying also in physics: you're not the sage on stage. You're the guide on the side. And so, you know, step away. Don't get in the way of the subject, and quit trying to be the sage on stage. You have a very limited understanding as a sage. You're actually not as smart as you think you are. There's another thing which is frustrating, and it came up in the context of RoboFlash, and I think it's important, perhaps, Dawn, for your go forward in neurodivergent enablement. And I want to use the STEM field in general. I think the STEM world is an enormous opportunity for people to create futures. And I'll give you an example of what is not, and then you can sort of see it in the opposite. If you think of professional sports as an example of a career path or a lifelong thing, sports are a pyramid, right? We all start as little kids kicking a ball or throwing a ball, and everybody's an athlete, and everybody's a soccer star. And then the funnel narrows. Then you get to high school, and there's narrowing. Then you get to college, it's really narrow. And then you get to the sports level. How many professional athletes are there on the planet today, really? A fraction of a percent, right? So that's what I call a pyramid model for life development, right? Now, take STEM as an example. You start off knowing nothing. You're a babe in the woods. In fact, most of what the physics you learn as a baby is wrong. But it doesn't matter. You will figure it out. And as you go forward, more and more opportunities. Oh, see, I'm talking my hands again. I got to stop this. So I'm making a funnel, okay? I'm making an upward-facing funnel, okay? And as you go into that funnel, more and more things become open to you and possible. And so more things, the environment in which you are in, thrive and open as you move forward. And so you're moving forward in time, you're moving forward in your own development, And so the STEM funnel never shuts down. It never necks down like these other traditional funnels. And so my view is the neurodivergent path for the future of neurodivergent people is the STEM funnel. Get them in the funnel and let them expand into it. Don't put them in closing funnels like art, right? The supreme artists of the planet are numbered like the athletes and the movie stars, right? And the music people. There's just a very limited people who achieve ultimate success in those funnels. But in this world, in the STEM world, the world that on the planet we live, the STEM is one of the very few open top funnels. And so we should be making far more effort to create neurodivergent insertion into that funnel as soon as possible so that they can grow into it instead of being shut out of it. And that to me that was our thinking on the RoboFlash team. We hoped we could start to show people that, hey, these students have a future. They can do things. Maybe it's not, maybe they're not making a 5 on the AP physics exam, but that doesn't matter. They're still quite capable of engaging in the STEM world and making meaningful contributions.
And I would say that ideally that should be the case in any area of life that you enjoy. I don't know if a lot of people here know this, but I was an amateur ring fighter for a while, which surprises people. But I absolutely loved it. I absolutely loved it. There was no way I was going to be a professional. For one thing, I had to get out because I value my brain.
Yeah.
But to the extent that I was in it in a safe way most of the time, it added immensely to all areas of my life. And so, yeah, I think that we don't have enough flexibility in terms of gathering the things that enrich our lives. Oh, only professionals do that, or only smart people do that, but if you enjoy it, there should be a way for that to plug into your life.
Right. I'm looking for more access to the fern. I'm looking for more access early to the fur-lined ruts in the STEM open funnel. Let people default in there and let them find their default path to, financial security, predictability, health insurance, so they can move on and do all these other things that you're talking about too along the way. But they have to have a way of supporting themselves. They have to have a way of having, some way in this world that we live in, the capitalist environment we live in today. They have to be able to make a living in some way. And there's so many ways to do it in STEM once you open the funnel and get in it. It's just easier to me. And the STEM funnel is full of people who are faking it as neurotypicals who aren't really quite typical. And I may be one of them.
Well, there's a long-standing joke, about academe being the destination of choice for a lot of people are in our generation who had nowhere else to go and be happy and successful.
Well, of course, I do hear stuff about the robotics in needs. You see, when it comes to me understanding the STEM stuff going on here, robotics is a rather complex and newest thing for me to go through because of all the circuitry and all. But luckily, I do remember watching that one backyard science video of 2010. It's very old. Sponsoring Gorilla Glue stuff. All it takes is to bring up with some simple machines to combine those compartments into one thing, but you can't operate a robot without an on and off switch or anything that runs on any of those batteries and any of those components that need to function. like wirings and circuitry and light bulbs. But don't forget about some other Don't forget about the components like resistors and all that such. And don't forget about the integrated circuits. You know, like how robots need to function with a simple task at hand that you ever seen in any of those factory works, like robot hands that functions like we're grabbing things and all. Gotta be honest with you, we have the technology needed from all around the world in the emergency areas, in the emergency age, like that. But then again, what will happen if robotics were to take on a form of a singularity when robots ascend to a point of no return? That is the question.
So, good question. Excellent question. So I was in the artificial intelligence research program at Texas Instruments in the early 80s. And I've been following with some interest the recent media obsession with artificial intelligence. There's two things. Let's divide artificial intelligence kind of into two types of intelligence when they're referring to AI. One is where the machine is capable of creative, independent concept that is outside the realm of its prior experience, what we would think of outside of its prior experience. And so artists might say this is the creative spark. The other world of what is being called artificial intelligence is the one that was in the 80s, was separate from AI and was called machine learning. And this is where you build what's essentially a mathematical concept called a neural network. You get gazillions of piles of data, large amounts of data on, and it does a big massive pattern analysis, and it tunes the neural network by putting different weights on different nodes of information to create essentially a complex decision tree that looks very complex, but for the computer is simple because it's programmable with weighted numbers and symbols. And then it will spit out the most likely or the most predictive pattern that it would generate based on the prior millions of patterns that it's already analyzed. This looks a lot like intelligence because most of the time we are not bothering with creativity, we are bothering with mimicry. And this is, to me, the distinction. The stuff that we see today is largely mimicry based on the gigatrillion terabytes of data that we are voluntarily giving to people like Google and Facebook and Amazon, who are then training their neural networks on all of us as we speak, probably using this video as part of it. And they will then produce something that we look at and go, oh, that looks pretty realistic. Well, it's still not artificially intelligent, in my view. And it may even pass the Turing test. You can Google that. But it would not be what I think of as a creative intelligence that I would be sufficiently worried about taking over the universe. So that would be my first thought on your second point. Your first point, I think, is also an interesting idea concerning scale and integration complexity. All of the stuff you saw on the RoboFlash team, those were essentially kits of robotic parts. They got a kit of X number, they got 100 parts in a box, and then they could put together things based on the kit. But they didn't have to invent a computer from scratch. They didn't have to, build integrated circuit from scratch. And they had a head start, right, on building something that they could make work. And we were all that way, right? I mean, we all started, 150 years ago from the Industrial Revolution. Somebody had to invent the first something. And that's the creativity that's missing in the current AI. Somebody had to invent the concept of that first Ohm's law circuit voltage and current and resistance and the little resistor and how is it made out of ceramic material with a little lead wire in it and all this stuff. Somebody had to invent all that. And so the inventors have been building stuff for us for 150 years, and now we're just layering onto it. So I guess, Dawn, from an archaeological point of view, right, if somebody were to burrow down into the planet through the headquarters of Texas Instruments or something, they would find down there in the basement a resistor, right? And on top of it, they would have an integrated circuit. And then on top of that, they would have a box with a bunch of integrators. I mean, it's kind of an archaeological dig there. Kind of interesting from that perspective. But yes, scale integration is increasingly is combinatorially blowing up in our face, and we have things happening around us. A friend of mine who's in robotics, I find out this week that he has taken his mobile home, his Winnebago camper. He went out and bought 10 acres. He brought his old Winnebago. He dumped it in the middle of the field. He bought 4 bulldozers. He hooked up a bunch of robotics stuff from First Robotics robots his kids have been using. He's hooked up a bunch of that to the bulldozers, and he's figuring out how to drive bulldozers remotely from his Winnebago. Now, if you think about that, we have people flying drones all over the place from trailers, right? All over the world, we have people flying a drone. And yet we have guys driving bulldozers up and down the highway. Well, we don't need to do that. Put them on a drone. Put them in a robot, a bulldozer robot, and let them sit in an air-conditioned van somewhere, right? I mean, all kinds of people.
Except Reed, they want to do that.
Oh, well,
that's fun for them.
Oh, okay. Well, think about the millions of people who could be having fun driving robotic bulldozers. Wouldn't that be awesome? I mean, that would be so much fun. So, yeah, I mean, we don't know what's going to be happening in 10 years, 20 years. It's crazy.
Yeah, it would be rather devastating if that were to happen in the later times, especially when it comes to hearing stuff about the thought experiment, such as Rocco's basilisk. You don't want any of those ferocious beasts inside of our cyberspace, do we?
No. I'm not worried yet. That I'm not worried about. I'm worried about a lot of other stuff. That one's not one.
Okay.
A few things kind of stand out in what you said before about how you're competing and how resource intensive certain things can be, and how that if you're going to put resources in one place, how it ends up sort of diverting resources from another place. It's almost like this kind of zero sums type of game where you love to do one thing, but then you've got sort of this competing. It sort of takes away from this other area that may be necessary for something to be, perpetuated or viable, and I mean, to me that, and I think the word capitalism sort of fit in there somewhere, right. About, in order for things to, I guess, be sustainable, then, there's got to be, some kind of, I mean, there's sort of the emotional part that, people do things because, it's intrinsically rewarding. But then you've got sort of we joked around about reality sort of rearing its ugly head, and that things have to be sort of sustainable, from a perspective of, the I guess the society in which we live in, which very much is around things that are based on products and, I guess, financial incentives, so it gets me thinking about, like, how do you kind of put these things together, so that, you do have something that's, that is sustainable, that doesn't have to sort of compete with things that, you kind of have to do as a day job, so that you can continue to do what you're doing, and it seems like there's got to be a different kind of paradigm here that will sort of sustain all this, because from what it is right now, these things seem to be at odds. Like even in the work that we do, we very much would love to spend all of our time and effort doing these projects, that sort of advance the conversation on, say, neurodiversity, or people who are differently able. But at the same time, there's this almost this competing element that in order for you to do that, certain requirements have to be met in other areas, that sort of also divert from your resources to, create in, a space that say that you're most interested in. So it's almost like, you have a day job, right? That you have to satisfy, in order to continue to be around to do this other stuff.
I would often tell my students that I taught physics in the day so I could be a robotics coach. So one of the things that we didn't do in the RoboFlash, which I thought was a necessary next step or soon to become step, was we did not document the gain. We did not document the immediate and possible sustained benefit to the students that were involved, because we didn't know how. B, we were going too fast and we were overtaxed anyway. And I was hoping someday we would maybe find a larger organization or one more interested in that particular issue. It could be easily a PhD thesis if somebody wanted to dig in and try this. And it could be actually a program of research to see what works and what doesn't work in this type of context, right? But it would have to be a university program somewhere that was willing to dig in and say, how can we activate these learning potentials in neurodivergent students, which are currently relatively unaccessed? And the failure associated with that is expensive. It is costing society something. There's probably a number has been put on that if you were to go find the right people who look at such stuff. And then you could say, well, look, maybe if we could get 50% of these students, or 1 in 10 of these students engaged in, it would reduce the burden on the government, society, however you want to try to pitch it. But I don't know, that would seem to me would have to be a necessary pre-step to get a more self-sustaining system in place. But I was way outside my experience and knowledge zone when I got to that point.
I have so much to say. Two main things. I have friends at McGill in Montreal and also at USC that are trying to do exactly what you're talking about.
Okay.
And it's because of my second point, which is when the neuro-expansive mind is allowed to flourish, society benefits. I mean, we're all benefiting from things that neuro-expansive people invented. They're dead now. You can get lots of praise for dead neuro-expansive people, Everybody wants to be on an island with Tesla, you know what I mean? But yeah, I think it's less a matter, and this is my prejudice, less a matter of investment, more a matter of reciprocation and payback. Mm-hmm. We know what kinds of people drive culture forward. Mm-hmm. And it's the people, not everyone, I don't want to overgeneralize, but many times it's the very people we hamstring as we front load. Yeah.
Yeah, that also makes me think about, I know you kind of made a joke about, some of the most inventive people masquerading as neurotypicals. Whether or not, this is sort of a cultural myth. These things that we enjoy are where do they actually come from? And are they misattributed? And if we stop that misattribution, can we enjoy more of these things? So that may be another angle to explore.
Yeah, history is written by the winners, and the winners tend to be when there's everybody's the father of a good idea, right? So things that are seen as successful, other people who never had anything to do with it run up to it and say, "Oh, I was a part of this. I did this. I was participant." And the next thing you know, it's all muddied up. Interesting stories from Texas Instruments about the intervention of the integrated circuit. Jack Kilby was the guy who's attributed. There's a couple of guys at Bell Labs who were doing similar work at the same time. Kilby is certainly recognized at Texas Instruments as the real inventor of the integrated circuit. So there's some debate about all this. But the interesting thing about Jack Kilby is he was very atypical. The people who knew him, right, at Central Research at TI, Jack Kilby was just a goofball. They thought of him as a goofball, not conformant. Didn't do this, didn't do that, wouldn't do this, and he came up with this idea of, well, why don't we put all these little components onto one substrate and make them there instead of trying to hook them all up all the time? It's a pain in the neck. And so, of course, once everybody saw him do it, they all go, oh, well, gee, that was obvious. But, well, gee, if it was so freaking obvious, why did it take Jack Kilby to show you how to do it? And so, and then, of course, now everybody just blows past it. And it's just an assumption that, oh, yeah, well, somebody came up with that. Well, somebody had to. Somebody had to invent that idea and break through that set of assumptions. It's usually a removal of assumptions where the creative process starts. Somebody challenges an assumption and takes it away. Einstein took away the assumption of determinism to come up with the concepts that he came up with. Quantum mechanics is based on the idea that deterministic causality is not a thing. A does not cause B. It might cause B. There's a probability that it causes B, but it's not a certainty. It is not a predetermined. And that just simple removal of that assumption opened up a lot of possibilities. So yeah, Don, to your point, eliminating and acknowledging is probably more the correct breakthrough approach to this than remove the assumption that neurodivergent people are incapable. Just remove it. Just take it away. And then move forward from there. Quit trying to rationalize and justify it. Just move on. Yeah.
Removing assumptions from one's native culture might be the hardest thing on the planet. At least for human beings.
Isn't it the assumptions that kept us alive? I mean, aren't some of them some of the assumptions like don't drink bad water, stuff like that. That's what kept us alive.
But that I would argue is not a cultural artifact. That's a definite cause and effect sort of equation. Whereas culture is more the interpretation of how you approach that problem, how you solve that problem, etc. And those assumptions are it seems almost deeper than these cause and effect equations. I mean, look at the environment, look at the climate, etc. We are going to die. I don't want to be a bummer, but I mean, it's the best point I can think to illustrate that culture is in so many ways stronger than these obvious cause and effect patterns that we can discern as factual.
Yeah. So I think what you're saying is that one way we could attack the climate problem is if we were all ingrained in a scientific cause and effect cultural shared culture. Like if a group of scientists if it was only a group of scientists sitting in a room and they were the only people on the planet, they would agree on a way to deal with the climate problem. But if you take a bunch of non-scientists and put them in a room together, probably the last way they're going to come together and agree on how to deal with it is something they're not familiar with. They're going to try a different way.
Well, that gets sticky because if we had such a tribal culture without traditional science as we define it in control, would the problem have even arisen in the first place?
Right.
Because there is this innate caring about the problem in so many cultures other than modern Western culture.
Right. Good point.
So it's an interesting question. It's an interesting question.
Yeah. We don't know. On this track, in this universe, we don't know. But
we don't know.
The answer is out there, Dawn. I know it is. I have faith.
In a parallel universe, for sure.
Yeah. We need to find a way to get over there as fast as we can.
I'm working on it. I mean, it's on my mind. It's on my mind frequently. Well, do you have any closing thoughts, Friedman?
I thank you for this opportunity, Dawn. Roger, it's as always, Dawn, when I spend time in your company, and now I've learned more about Roger. You collect an extraordinary groups of people together, and to have incredible sharing of ideas and concepts and experiences. So I thank you for that. I hope that perhaps others here have picked up a few things that they can use as they go forward. But this story, it doesn't end, right? I mean, it's still going. Yvonne, the lead, I forgot to mention this, Yvonne, the lead student who you saw a lot of in the video, I had a chance to reconnect with Yvonne last week. She has 4 young boys, and she's raising a family. And I said, you almost have enough to start a robotics team. And she said, don't know about that. So
that would be really cool. Well, I'm blessed to have you in my life. And it's interesting how many times all of my sort of disparate connections make the observation that I know so many interesting, compelling people. And I am definitely blessed on that level for sure. So I can't thank you enough for being here. I can't wait to watch the playback part that I missed. And and we, of course, will have you back in the future.
Okay. Be happy to do it.
Great. Thank you much.
Okay. Take care.